Tom Roche spent 27 years at ESPN, infamously known for his work on SportsCenter Top 10. He worked on ESPN News. He worked on ESPN, a litany of different jobs as a producer. He is with us today, and you can see behind him, and I love how he cropped this shot. There's one Emmy, but let's not kid ourselves here. Tom, you've got two Emmys to your name.
Okay,
I'm
yeah,
Brian.
two.
I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. And Tom, first of all, thank you for doing this. I'm excited to highlight you because you are someone, if you go to your Twitter, anybody, I encourage everybody, Stormers_15. Tom knows how to find a good highlight in sports. He has an eye for talent. He's been doing that his whole career in sifting through and producing these SportsCenter Top Tens. Now it's about finding those little clips of highlights of Tom and where they stand out and where he pops. So that's what the basis of this conversation is going to be. And let me start there, Tom. If you were to, I don't expect you to go top 10 here, but if you're
Okay.
listing some of the nuggets from your ESPN experience that would go into your ESPN top 10, what are they?
Oh boy, I think at the top it's one I rarely share, but I will. Is my relationship that I made with Bill Walton. The last year I worked on NBA, playing a pickup game with Mark Jackson at the Y. That post is out on LinkedIn now. Worth a read. Um, my favorite thing of all time, though, is the 3 years I spent on Top 10 by a mile. It wasn't even, I mean, I did some other great projects there, but I never got anything even close to as rewarding as my time spent on that. It was really a learning experience that I could never have imagined. It was a lot of fun when I did it. And there's a million others, launching a show called The Highlight Express on ESPN News way back in 2011, I believe it was, when they invented it. I was glad I got to kind of invent what that show was as it existed for the couple of years it was on TV. There's just millions of them. I mean, I was an associate producer on a show called The NBA Tonight. I got to go to a bunch of All-Star games. Cleveland in 1997, NBA at 50 was a real treat. Oakland, Vince Carter dunk contest 2001 from the front row was pretty nice to go through to as well. So there was a lot. There's a million of them. There's way more than 10, but those are just a handful of the good ones.
You brought up Mark Jackson, and obviously, those who are following you on LinkedIn can see the experiences that you had. You talked about them in a note where Mark Jackson and you played in a YMCA game, and you guys just kept winning. You kept winning. You
Yep.
were playing, scrimmaging for 2 hours and longer. And I have heard, Tom, that ESPN, there's a lot of talent basketball wise. I mean, yeah, there are the former NBA guys, but guys like you can shoot the ball. I've had on Adam Stanko. He's a pretty good player as well. You might know Mike Buckland.
Yep.
All of these guys can really shoot the rock. So what were those scrimmages and those pickup games like between ESPN folks, and how intense were they?
It usually would depend on the crowd that would come to the games. Like, there was only one full court at the local Y that we played at. So if the numbers got up to like 25 ish plus, you knew you were going to be sitting a long time if you didn't get in the first game. So you would adjust the rules a little bit. The games would go to 7 and no twos, but no win by 2 either. So you could win 7-6. So you would get to some of those games where it would not be close to fights, but very intense. Like, you knew if you lost, you were sitting for like an hour and a half, then you might as well go home. Because by the time it's 2 o'clock, you're like, I can't stay here and wait for another game. So when we would play to 7, the games would get turned up pretty good. And it was really a lot of fun. I mean, we were all, the competitive level was pretty the same with everybody. I wasn't no superstar. I was no superstar, but you could hang. But I mean, we were all sort of the same. We all were college intramural guys that were still trying to like hang on to whatever was left. And we had a few, D3, D2 guys that were really solid. But the games could get, again, if you had 25 people at the Y, you knew it was like, I wish I got in the first game, because that was the only game you were playing to 11 the whole day. And if we were waiting, like if there were 25 guys there and 10 were playing with 15 plus waiting, and that one was going to 11 and it would take some time to finish, we'd all be rolling our eyes like, come on, guys, let's finish this game. I know you want to play longer, but we all have to get a turn too. So it could get pretty intense, but fun. Always a good time.
How good was Adam Stanko when you guys were playing basketball together when he was at ESPN? He talks up a pretty big game.
Stanko's a talker, but he's good. I mean, he was a great setup guy. He was always looking to dish it around a little bit. He was fun. It was just a great guy to hang with and play. Pretty casual guy, but yeah, good player, no doubt. But an assist man first and a score man second, which is always great when you want to shoot a lot like I do.
We are joined by Tom Roche, former ESPN producer, 27 years with ESPN. And I saw something that you mentioned as well on LinkedIn, Tom, where you were describing what it was like in the aftermath of 9/11 and your role at ESPN when there weren't games going on at that point, when you were talking about how you did something that maybe you weren't assigned to do initially. They weren't in your job responsibilities, where you were constructing
Oh
a
wow, yeah,
tape
that's a good one.
library.
Mhm.
And you had like 5 or 6 people or so building this thing. Why does it, what I see from you, Tom, is a common trend of you just being selfless and being caring and doing things that you should be getting more credit for. Why do you constantly have this common denominator of doing things to help others and feel such a pull and a gravitation towards doing things like that?
I've always been, what can I do to help? I'm here to help. It's like a sign, an invisible sign I've always had around my neck. I'm here to help. So when I was there, anybody who needed help with anything, I'm in. I mean, I've been there long enough. I know a few things along the way. I can pass on a little knowledge where I can. And I think that's a responsibility that all of us had there, to pass on what we know to the people that are coming up and through the ranks. I mean, we owe it to them. We owe it to ourselves for them to understand how the place works. So going back to the 9/11, there wasn't a lot to do, and they needed some help up in the warehouse to construct some shelving for the library. I'm like, who wants to go do that for a couple of days while we sort out our lives? And I got a bunch of people, 4 or 5, maybe 6, to go up there and help out. One of the guys is named Denny Wolf. He's a producer of features, excellent producer and boss of a lot of the people that do the storytelling over there. And we always connect around 9/11, like, hey, Danny, remember? And he's like, one of my favorite days of all time. So, and that's, we're going back a few years now, and that always kind of resonates with me. So it's just wanting to help. I mean, if I have a few new people on the show staff, I can't get anywhere unless I teach them how to do some of the things that they need to learn to have success on the show and in the rest of their careers there, no matter what they try to do. So I've always gotten a kick out of that. And it pays back way more than you can ever imagine. Shows are great, but the connections you make with the people that work in the shows last forever. So I've always kind of vested in that.
Speaking of other shows you've worked on and you being a supervisor, what are your common characteristics and traits in how you want to come off as a boss and how you did come off as a boss in other endeavors at ESPN?
I think being approachable, being a good listener, those are the things that I think I valued a lot when I was coming up. If I worked for a person you interviewed, Bruce Bernstein was a coordinating producer my whole career there. And he was always listening. He taught me a lot about how to listen to people and see what they have to say and make sure that you're listening to what that is to help yourself out and learn from them. So I've had a lot of mentors there. That a guy named Mike McQuaid, who runs the golf remotes now, and he's the coordinating producer over at Scott Van Pelt Sports Center. They just taught me so much about what I needed to know to survive there. And I'm like, I have to take this knowledge and run with it. Barry Sachs is another guy that's big on LinkedIn, who's a coordinating producer who had more advice for me than anybody ever. And their nuggets of wisdom kind of came to me, and I can just share them with everybody the way I would share them. And I know that was appreciated by them, and that the value in that, it goes on forever and ever and ever. So even though I'm not there anymore, I still am, because I have some people there that listened to what I had to say because I listened to what they had to say.
What's a tangible nugget that you remember from Barry Sachs in something he taught you?
Oh, let's see. It's not the most important thing, but the thing that comes to mind quickly is when you have a lead story, why are you in a hurry to run away from it? Make it worth leading with. If you decide to lead with a good story, make it worth it. So pour all of your resources into what that story is, and then no one's going to debate you did the wrong thing. You put all your eggs in that basket, and here's why it's the lead. Make it special, he would say, and then the rest would kind of be the rest. The bees have to be good too. So put that other stuff that you had next to that content later in the show, then that content's good in that block. So that was just one of the things he taught me. But again, always be there for your people. He was always around everybody. He would come into screening when we were all young production assistants and just kind of stir some things up and see what everybody's paying attention to. And I really admired that in him, because a lot of CPs don't come, or didn't back then, come down and see how everybody was doing. But he was always interested in what you were doing. And that really impressed a lot of me when I was younger there. And I made sure I kept that going when I was older there.
If the everyday sports fan could have come down and watched your decision-making process when putting together the SportsCenter Top Tens, because you only have a finite amount of slots here, and there's probably a whole lot of debate because there's so many that just miss and don't make it, and then you get the backlash on Twitter and social media. Why didn't you put this in? So how do you deal with that because of how finite the amount of spaces you have, and you're just trying to get the best product out there?
Well, I came to the project in 2016, and I'd never produced it. I did it maybe once when I was a PA, but I don't even remember if it was even in practice when I was a PA back in the 90s. But I came to it and I was like, okay, how can we make this really as good as it is? How can we make it better? So let's start looking in places that we're not looking right now. The way it was staffed before was really limiting as far as what you could look for, because you didn't have a lot of time. You were so busy collecting everything and writing all the shot sheets and producing it in edit that you couldn't spend a couple hours at 5 o'clock looking around for across the globe. But the philosophy was always like, well, number 10, I would always tell the newer PAs doing it, number 10 is going to be better than 9 or 8. And they'd look at me kind of funny and like, number 10 is the first thing you see. So please find something that's interesting that grabs someone's attention. If it's a high school softball play from wherever that's really exciting to look at, it's a great way to get interested into what you're doing, something you're not expecting. If it's another no-look pass in an NBA game, there's going to be some of those. That's exciting, but it's not as cool as like a story that you might be able to tell with number 10. So as long as you started with a good number 10 and had a great number 1, 2 to 9 is, you can leave all that up to debate. Now, if you miss number 1, people are going to share that with you, but you can't worry about them. You just have to produce. And I would put that on the person I was working with to work with me. It was always a young production assistant that would do it, a younger or newer, less experienced. And I'm like, as long as you hit 1 and make it great, and 10's really interesting, the rest is going to kind of fall into a normal slot. You'll see it. The more you watch it, you'll see how it feels. And it really, that's how you experience it as a viewer. It's 3 minutes and you've got to watch the whole thing and be like, okay, I've seen it all. You tend to watch it in chunks. Like I'm watching 10, I'm watching 9 separately. But when you put it all together before you go into edit and watch all 10, you go, okay, 3 is definitely better than 2. Let's switch those. Okay, 4 is definitely worse than 7. Let's move that back. And with enough collaboration back and forth, we would always get to our track record was pretty good, I'd say.
What was the hardest in terms of a decision you had to make where it forced you, even days or even hours after you put out that programming, the top 10, where you still were second guessing yourself, or it still came, did I really make the right move there with going with that clip at that spot?
I mean, none really stick out. There was a couple of years ago, it might have been All-Star Game NBA versus an NHL play. And the goal was like, I thought it was easily the best thing of the day. The NBA play was a Steph Curry bounce off the floor, alley-oop to Giannis. It was a great play. But I thought, well, there's no one anywhere near the basket. It's one of those playground plays you see in the All-Star Game. It was great. And Giannis was like 9 feet over the rim. But if you really looked at the hockey play I thought was better.
Yeah.
And then if after we drop off the last version of it, it can be re-edited by people that come in to do the morning shows for whatever way they want to do it. So they changed it. Okay, great. No big deal. But sometimes it's like, I got 1 and 1A. You just got to kind of go with your gut and see what you think is best. And if my defense is, I felt that was the better play, nobody can really come back and say, well, it wasn't. Well, I felt it was. If you felt the other one was, that's you. We're different people, so we may feel different things about it.
Yeah, the subjectivity of the business. We are joined by sports media giant Tom Roche. I'm Bryan Fenley, an actual anchor at Fox Sports Radio. I mean, it's honest. I mean, I'm not lying here. You're just being humble. What was it like working with Trey Wingo? Because I actually had him on for a fun conversation, and certainly a beloved member of sports media and in the eyes of the sports media consumer. But you worked on his show, if I'm not mistaken, with Golick and Wingo on the radio and TV side.
Yep. Yeah, Trey, I've known Trey since when did he come over? 2000, maybe a little bit before. I've known Trey forever, and we go back a long way. So I came to hit the radio side of the radio program in the fall of 2019. I saw him in the hallway. I'm like, hey, I'm coming to hang out on the TV side. He's like, love you, brother. I'm like, cool. So always good. I mean, it was a really strange year on the show because we're actually coming up on the year anniversary of producing it from home. It was a year next week when we did it. The last 3 months of it, we did it from home. And it was great being part of that group. The radio guys I connected with are awesome. A lot of friends over there. And just getting to be part of it. It was really a well-established product by the time I got there. And it was great to just fold right into it. I'm back and forth with Junior on Twitter once in a while now. It's great. He's a super good guy. But Trey, he's one of the all-timers. He's always been great to me. And it was great to be part of that. The last show they did, I believe it was July last year. I think it was July 31st, when they had the Golick family on, and they're all crying on the set. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. So I was glad that I got to reconnect with Trey and get to know Senior and Junior a little bit along the way. It really was a great time working with him after all these years of not working with him while he was over on the NFL. So I'm a Trey guy all the way.
Do you remember an instance working with Trey where his kindness showed out the most to you, and just how wonderful of a man he's been and how classy he is as a broadcaster?
He just treats everybody like you would expect. I'm sure he treated you the same way. He treats everybody with ultimate respect. Like this week, he's been posting pictures of him and Kenny Mayne golfing. And it's like, he's just thinking about his people. And that's really, really great to hear. And he's always reinforcing that. He would always, after the show, get his steps in around campus, walking from studio to studio to building to get his steps up. And I'm like, I like that you're keeping your fighting weight where it is. He's like, yeah, I got to do it. But he always would stop and say hello to everybody. And just seeing that every day just shows you what kind of a guy he is. He's great. And the more, working with him was a pleasure way back in the day when we were producing highlights and segments for his shows, and as it was working on the radio with him as well.
What made working with Steve Weissman the most enjoyable to you?
He was willing to learn, which was when he was new at ESPN. It can be pretty intimidating when you're like, oh my God, I'm young, I'm here. What is this show? How do I work here? But he was always really open to any suggestions that I had to how to learn how to do stuff. I didn't teach him how to do that. He was pretty talented. So I just had to kind of teach him, like, this is what we do. This is how we do it. And you're going to do it every night until you do something else. And he got really good, really fast. He was an excellent highlight seller. He could do any sport. And I was glad I got to be there at the beginning. I see him over the Tennis Channel now, and I got a soft spot for him for sure.
Yeah, he's certainly one of the great guys in the business. Speaking of highlights, you used to do overnights on ESPN News.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were living in your brain trying to figure out what you're doing overnights, working highlights on ESPN News, what is the life of that point in your career of Tom Roche when you had that position at ESPN?
Well, the show was basically a half an hour wrap-up show, but it was on live at 11. So the challenge was doing it live at 11 and then keeping in the back of your mind, how are we going to finish this thing? And because it used to re-air like 1,000 times the next day. So you had to kind of keep both things in your mind. Like, how am I going to do this now? And how am I going to end it later with no mistakes? So you end up starting at 11 and you go to like, almost 2 o'clock to make sure that all the games are over and then all the runs are scored in Mariners, Orioles, or things like that. So you're always rooting against the long baseball game just because you don't want to stay there till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. But there were some of those days too. But again, decisions are always what producing is about. So what are the best decisions to make? You got to decide. So I told the producers, I'm like, don't look at me, just produce, producer. So you've got to figure out what the best content is for the half an hour. Now we had some restrictions on video for baseball, so we had to make our choices very carefully, but we always ended up with the right thing. So if Matt Cain throws a perfect game on a 10 o'clock game for the West Coast, we've got to deal with that. That was a night we dealt with it pretty well. But again, if we find out there were 3 other one-hitters that night that we didn't know about, now we've got to get those back in the show and make them all around the no-hitter to present the best baseball content we can. So you're always thinking about how you're going to end the night. Like when LeBron chooses the Heat at 1:30 in the morning on a Wednesday when you think you're done the day before the decision, you've got some decisions to make on your own, and that might cost you an hour or two of sleep. But again, you're always asking yourself, what's the best half hour I'm leaving for everybody at the end of the night? And I think we hit way more than we missed. So it was a good time. I learned a ton doing that.
There was, or there is, a hashtag that you use on your Twitter account. And I encourage everybody to follow you on Twitter, Stormers_15. And it's hashtag just produce producers.
Oh, yeah.
What is the genesis of that?
It's actually a Barry Sachs quote, I believe. It was a story that was handed down a few generations when he was coordinating, producing a show back in the day. I can't really remember the story verbatim, but the producer will often sometimes look behind to the back bench and ask for a little guidance if they're new to producing. And don't look at me, just produce, producer. So you have to make a lot of your own decisions as a producer. So I heard that story and I'm like, that makes a ton of sense. Like if you're producing, you have to learn that the show is in front of you in the control room and everything's kind of happening around you. That's something I learned from Mike McQuaid. Like the show's in front of you. Don't stare at the monitor, stare at the wall and see what's going on. And the show is going to organically kind of come to you in a way that is going to make some sense, but just don't get caught up in the details. Just what's happening right now. And I've passed that along to all my disciples that worked on Top 10. And it's kind of like in joking and passing, but it really does mean something. Like, don't look at me, own the work, just produce, producer. And that's for any producer of anything, whether you're producing, your dinner tonight, own what you're producing, produce it. And that's, if you're vested in it, you're going to produce it a lot better. So when I was doing highlights, when I was 24 years old, if I was given the room to run with it, own the highlight and just producer, makes a lot of sense. I feel like I'm in the content a lot more than somebody telling me what to do. It's an old adage. If I teach you how to fish, you're going to eat forever. But if you're always looking for me to make the meal, we might have a problem after a little while, because I could cook for you all the time, or I could teach you how. So just producer is kind of an offshoot of that. And that's kind of catchy. So if something pops up, I'll throw it on a hashtag just once in a while.
Yeah, not only is it a hashtag, but I think it should go on a T-shirt. So let me know when you get those out, and I might have to get one. Tom Roche is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. When the work at ESPN, Tom, would get super stressful because you were on deadline and you're trying to, like you said, like maybe there's a no-hitter that you're trying to watch, and then there's this other breaking news taking place, and so you are trying to figure out a way to deal with all of this. What is your temperament like, and what do you think is the best way to handle sports frenetic news coming in all at once and you trying to make the most out of the opportunity?
It depends on how much is going on at the same time. So, I've had my share of those things. Like I said, the Matt Cain perfect game kind of dropped in my lap out of nowhere, because you never expect that. And neither can you expect a Homer Bailey's second no-hitter. And I was live during that. So you just have to kind of seize the reins. And what they do very well there is that, like the other night, Kluber gets a no-hitter. Okay. Bruins win in double overtime. Okay. Grizzlies Spurs game was down to the wire. Okay. And then in the back burner is LeBron versus Steph. Okay. You're dying for days like that. So it's just a matter of keeping your wits about you, making sure that everybody knows that you got it. Because if you're freaking out, they might freak out. So let's keep the freaking out inside and measure where you're at. All right, what's going on right now? All right, Kluber's no-hitter just finished. How are we treating that? If you're live, I think the game ended before the show started. That again I was watching the Yankees feed, not watching SportsCenter, but I think it ended before 11. So if it happens while you're on, you're always asking yourself, right now, what's going on? All right, it's Kluber. So all the elements are coming in. All right, what do I have? Where's the sound? What else? Where obviously you have the highlight, but what else can go with that to make your coverage better? So going back to my Homer Bailey second no-hitter of all people to throw his second no-hitter of his life, here's a guy, pretty journeyman guy, 2 no-hitters. So what are we getting from the Reds game that we can turn around? How much in the moment are we living? Because we're banking on the viewers showing up and watching us for all that coverage. So let's watch it and let's make sure we're repurposing all the right things until you're basically out of gas. All right, we've already aired everything this hour from what we can possibly air. All right, now we're done with it. Now we're going to reset for the next hour and we'll do it all again. So it's just a matter of staying calm in the moment and being like, all right, there's a lot going on right now, but all right, they just won the championship. Okay, we knew that was going to happen. We were ready for it before. So now when it happens, it just happens. So the more reps you get in the chair, the better you're going to be when stuff's going to go bananas on you.
I would be remiss not to thank you, Tom, because it was a couple years ago. I was working as like a local reporter anchor in Memphis, and I would cover the Memphis Grizzlies. And I was shooting a highlight from a Memphis Grizzlies game, and it was a preseason game, and I can't even remember who made the dunk, but I posted it on Twitter, and it started to go viral, and it ran on SportsCenter Top 10. And so
You're welcome.
I think it was like 2000, maybe 16, 2015 or something. So I know it's a couple years removed from that, but I just want to thank you
Oh, of course.
giving the green light to that. But as we sort of conclude here, I wanted to get your perspective on, with all of this experience and all the stories you've accumulated, how do you want to pour this into your next project, into your next venture?
Well, the helping of people is basically where I'm kind of steering myself as I go forward. Of course, I'm looking for freelance opportunities, etc. But I always wanted to help people out. So I think that's kind of where I'm headed. I actually have just started my own thing on the side. Maybe it's going to be the thing. I hope it turns into that, where I can help young people get into the business and know a little bit more about how to get into the business, some career coaching, some content coaching, how to make things look better. I'm here for anybody who needs anything, because I did a lot of that on the side there forever while I was producing shows. And it really was the thing that paid me back more than anything. So now let's see if the payback is for real and see if we can turn it into something good. So the website I'm working on right now, I've got to get that up and going, but stay tuned for future details on what I'm up to. But that's kind of where I'm steering myself while I look for something else.
As soon as we get those details, I'm going to be posting those because people need to get more in the know of what you are doing. Tom,
Yeah, anybody who wants to hit me up can hit me on LinkedIn if they have any questions about how to get into the business or how to make their stuff better. I'm an easy find on LinkedIn and Twitter. So message me up and see how we do.
no question about it. And Tom, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time. And I think a lot of people will get a whole lot out of your stories as a source of inspiration for them in their own journeys in the sports media field. Tom Roche with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. Tom, thank you so much for doing this.
Anytime. Hope to do it again soon.